On today's episode, we're sitting down with Right Worshipful Brother Ken Adamson from the Scottish Rite.
You're listening to The First Three Knocks, a Masonic podcast in the District of York, where we discuss topics for the betterment of Masonry. The opinions discussed in this podcast are those of the individual and do not represent the views of Grand Lodge or any other Masonic body. Now, here are your hosts.
Good afternoon, brethren. This is Worshipful Brother Bert Tellier coming to you from Hamilton, Ontario. We are on the road, The First Three Knocks. I am your co-host, sitting with...
Brother Gino Scovio, also the current Junior Warden of the Rising Sun Lodge out in Aurora, number 129.
And Brother Steve Sprott of Zaradatha Lodge 220 in beautiful, historic Uxbridge, Ontario.
Oh, you got the beautiful historic in there, finally.
It is a lovely place.
It is a very nice place. We are very excited to be sitting down with Right Worshipful Brother Ken Adamson. You have quite an incredible Masonic career, Scottish Rite career, York Rite.
I think the list goes
the
on
list
and
goes
on
and
and
on.
on.
But let me try and cover a couple of these because I think it sets the stage for what we're doing here today in Hamilton. We're coming to you from the Scottish Rite Club in Hamilton, Ontario, which is an incredible building. We've had the opportunity to tour with the lights on this time, so it was even more interesting with the lights on. But
you had occasion to be here with the lights off?
Well,
You were at the Grand Master's banquet 2 years ago?
No. When we came earlier, we snuck around a little bit
I
and
see. I
found a
see,
room,
yes.
and we couldn't figure the light situation, but our last guest was able to take us through on that tour. So that was great.
So you are past master of Temple Lodge number 324 here in Hamilton.
Indeed.
Past district deputy grand master of Hamilton District C.
Yes.
Correct. You are a member of 8 lodges in all 3 districts in the Hamilton area.
I am.
Is that correct? My goodness. Member of Royal Arch Masons, Ancaster Keystone Chapter, past first principal.
I am.
And grand organist of chapter. And I think you're also grand organist of Scottish Rite as well.
No. I'm Grand Organist of the provincial chapter of the Royal Order of Scotland.
Oh, there you go.
I do play. In your tour, you were probably in the cathedral. Now, there's a beautiful 3-manual Cassavant organ there that was installed coincident with the opening of the cathedral in 1923. And those are the instruments I'm trained on, and I certainly play that from time to time. But my duties as administrative secretary of the Valley pretty much preclude my playing during reunions and assemblies because I have to be all over every area. I cannot be stuck at the organ.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting role for you. In addition to all these areas that you've covered in your incredible career, you're basically leading this building and taking care of the stewardship of it.
Well, yes. With the focus on the stewardship, there are many volunteer leaders and officers in the Scottish Rite Valley of Hamilton. The Scottish Rite is composed of 3 bodies: the Lodge of Perfection, the Chapter of Rosecraw, and most of the 46 valleys across Canada have both a Lodge of Perfection and a Chapter of Rosecraw. Hamilton also has a consistory, and that's the senior body. That Lodge of Perfection takes you from degrees 4 through 14. Rosecraw goes from 15 to 18, and consistory is the senior degrees 19 to 32. 33 is an honorary degree. And one thing that I should make very clear is that those degrees in no way supersede the 3rd degree of Craft Lodge Masonry, going back into the history of the Scottish Rite and its development. And incidentally, it's not really Scottish, it's French and German. The French in particular, long story, the French in particular liked ceremony and degrees and stuff, and that's how we got all those degrees. But once you have achieved the rank of a Master Mason, that is the
Entry point.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Is that just a Master Mason or a proven Master Mason?
Well, basically a proven Master Mason. Okay. That's something, it's funny, in my history in Masonry, proving of one's 3rd degree sort of fell by the wayside in a number of lodges, and Temple 324 being a classic example. Now it's come back, though.
Right.
And I think it's terribly important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So very impressive career that you've had to date.
It's been interesting.
Yeah, you've covered a lot of ground. Maybe tell us a little bit, how did you get involved in Freemasonry, and what led you on this path to join these groups?
Well, both my grandfather and father were Masons, and as we all know, though, they really can't encourage. Now, my grandfather was forced to drop out of Corinthian Lodge 513 during the Depression. Simply didn't have the money to cover what was probably annual dues of $5 or $10, and that was very. He had 7 children, anyway, Dad was a member of Ancient Landmarks 654, and I must be honest, Dad was never a terribly enthusiastic Mason, but he did say to me on a number of occasions, "Ken, you'd love it." It was actually more through friends who were members of Temple 324 that really sparked the interest, and they didn't, come knocking at my door or anything, but there was a bit of encouragement there. And ultimately, I ended up joining Temple 324.
Oh, wonderful.
And that's how I, now, if anybody told me that night in December of 1984 that I would be as involved in the craft as I am today, I would have told them they were crazy.
I was just
I was,
say that.
I was in the laundry and dry cleaning business in a very significant way at the time, and at that time it was a very viable industry. Not anymore, but I was really involved in the industry.
Right.
But subsequently, I've become very involved in the craft.
Well, you haven't looked back. I mean, you've done a lot here, and are you married?
No, I'm not. That's probably one of the factors that has allowed me to be
So
is involved. In all seriousness, I think that's a very, very big factor in Masonry today. In the vernacular, there's the great Masonic lie. That one night a month.
You could do it.
Only 9 or 10 months of the year. They neglect to say 5 days a week. And that is a trap that Masons fall into. At one time, that was not a collective decision between husband and wife. Today, it very much is, and should be.
Yep.
I do recall back, in the distant history, people saying, don't get too involved. Don't neglect the rest of your life.
Right.
And I think that still applies even more so today than it did then.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your work here with the Scottish Rite. I mean, this is an incredible building. There's lots going on here.
Well, my friends in Temple Lodge were also extremely involved in the Scottish Rite. So unlike Craft Lodge, any of the Concordant body, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being encouraged to join. So, once I had become a Craft Lodge Mason and a Master Mason, and in those days you had to wait 6 months to be a Scottish Rite Mason after you'd become a Master Mason. Certainly the pressure was on to get involved in the Scottish Rite. In those days I was very heavily involved. That would have been 1985 that I got involved here. Got my consistory degrees in November of 1986. And I became involved in various casts. The lessons of Scottish Rite Masonry are portrayed in drama as exposed. And there is certainly ritual involved, but as compared to Craft Lodge, which is exclusively ritual, Scottish Rite is much more passive. But, you can be involved in casts and involved in portraying those degrees. And I, got involved in that fairly quickly. Well, the laundry and dry cleaning industry kind of headed south in the 90s and early in the 20th century, and many participants in that industry were no longer able to continue, and I was one of them. And I became heavily involved. In those days, I was on the board of the Scottish Rite Club. And I was asked, would I be prepared to become general manager of the club? There were some issues, and I did that until December of 2012. and then I became administrative secretary of the Valley. And it's basically my job to liaise with all the Masons, and that's one of my reasons for being involved in so many lodges as organist. I'm very visible out in the districts, and can basically get to know everyone in the districts, and that's hugely important because I coordinate all of the candidates coming in, and very, very important to know people out in the districts. And the 4 districts that we regard as the Hamilton Valley are Hamilton, ABC, and Brant. And,
Right.
I'm pretty active in all of those districts. Then the other real side of my job is keeping this building running. The newest part of the building is almost 100 years old.
Yeah,
We still, believe it or not, we still call it the new building.
Yeah.
This part where we're sitting right now, and there's a controversy as to whether or not it was built in 1892 or 1895. Jeff Boyle, whom you met earlier, is probably considerably more of an expert on that than I am. But anyway, it was built. I suspect that it probably was built in 1892. It was built with tobacco money. That's before income tax and before lung cancer was considered. Having said that, the head of the household here was George Thomas Tuckett, who was second generation president of the Tuckett Tobacco Company, which was just down Queen Street here. I would think one of the primary perks of owning a tobacco company would be a limitless supply of tobacco products. And as a result of that, he died in 1913, presumably of some sort of respiratory problem. And it did pass to a third generation, but then in 1925, the third generation really didn't have very much interest in it. And it was purchased by Imperial Tobacco in 1925, which was a much, much smaller company actually than Tuckett.
Interesting.
Tuckett
Was the
the
leader.
largest tobacco company in Canada for many, many years.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about the building. Now, we heard on our tour that there are several movies that were shot here,
Yes.
that type of thing. Tell us a little bit about that.
I'm sure you realized in your tour that the cost of maintaining this property is very high. A property of this age and complexity. I mean, there's always something. Just today, there's an issue with the elevator it's actually one of the newer parts of the building. That little tower there where the elevator is was built in 1965, but that's 55 years ago. And the brakes finally wore out, or I shouldn't say they wore out. The elevator didn't plummet, but they wore out of spec.
Yeah.
And then you have to. So there's always something like that
I can
on the
imagine.
go. Both the heating systems and there's a different system in this old part of the building, which is almost 130 years old, and the new building, which is almost 100 years old. They're still the original heating systems, basically.
That's incredible.
In each case, the boiler has been changed once. But you can imagine. Fortunately, coming out of laundry and dry cleaning, I grew up with steam and boilers and all of those
know a
things.
couple
So
of
that's
things, huh?
yeah. So that's that dovetails very, very nicely with my job. Just keeping the heat on, keeping the lights on is a consistent challenge, and that's part of my. So in summary, my job is to keep the building running, to liaise with the Masons in the district. My career as an organist is very conducive to that. And then keeping track of everybody. There are almost 6,000 members of this valley, covering the province. At one time, Hamilton, Moore Sovereign Consistory, was the only consistory in Ontario. Now that started to change in the early 50s when, in 1952, a consistory was created in Thunder Bay. Then subsequent to that, there was also one created in Ottawa and in Barrie. But, because of the history of it, Moore Sovereign Consistory remains the largest consistory in Canada. and and you have to keep track of all of that.
Oh yeah, and I imagine it's
It's
yeoman's
a
work.
daily.
Yeah.
That changes daily, if not hourly. Unfortunately, our largest cohort of membership now are people born in the 1930s, chaps who fought the Second World War and then came back and became Masons. Quite frankly, that and the decade before, the 20s, is under fire, as it were, in terms of members passing to the Grand Lodge above, and it's my job to keep track of all of that.
Right. Well, that's a lot of work, I can imagine. We were chatting earlier with Jeff as well, and one of the items we were asking him was, how do you see the Scottish Rite moving forward? How are you attracting members?
How do you get the growth going? What do you see? It's obviously a challenge throughout Craft Lodge and all the concordant bodies.
Yes, and let's start with Craft Lodge, because I think that is perhaps somewhat different than the concordant bodies. I think the challenges are somewhat different. Now, I firmly believe that there will always, however long that might be Craft Lodge Masonry. And I know there are lodges struggling in the province of Ontario, and just today I heard a number quoted that we're now slightly less than 30,000 Masons in the province, and that's probably half what it was when I became a Mason. But having said that, and there are lodges that are struggling, but there's also lodges that are doing very, very well.
Yep.
Thank you. The Barton, the lodge that you're going to
That was
attend
one of
tonight,
them,
being
absolutely.
a perfect example of that. Lodges seem to either be above or below critical mass. If you can get a group of young men involved, the lodge starts to perpetuate itself. On the other hand, if there are no young people in the lodge, and there's a bit of to me, a paradox there. You can love a lodge to death. We've always done things this way, and this is the way we want to do it. But boy, do we ever need new members. But unfortunately, there's often a caveat to that.
Yep.
And the caveat is the new members have to look, sound, act, etc., exactly the way we do, in order to, and that's a very easy. Churches fall into that trap.
Yep.
It's very easy, but ultimately, to succeed, Masonry has the demographics of our craft have to mirror the demographics of society. Clearly, if they don't, then we're probably not going to succeed, or at least we're not going to succeed to the extent that we could. Now, certain lodges, certain areas, Toronto, I think, being a classic example, have made that transition.
Yep.
Very, very successfully. Other lodges haven't, and I firmly believe there's possibly a correlation in what I say. Now, what I'm saying is very anecdotal. I should stress that, but I do think there's an issue there. But I think Craft Lodge Masonry is going to continue to exist. Will it look the way it did in 1984 when I came in? And you folks have obviously been involved for a considerable length of time. It's not going to look at all like what any of us thought it would look like when we came in. But will it thrive? Yes, in a somewhat different form. Now, concordant bodies, I think, face a somewhat different challenge. And let's face it, there are three primary concordant bodies in the province: the Scottish Rite, the York Rite, and the Shrine. Now, society, and we discussed this earlier, society has changed in that for most young men, and particularly young men who are married, spare time activities are much more of a collective decision today than they were 30, 40 years ago. And I think that's as it should be. I believe that's a good thing. But I don't think a young husband really has the option of spending an unlimited amount of time with Freemasonry or anything else. It has to dovetail with family life. So that puts some pressure on the concordant bodies in terms of membership. And obviously the Scottish Rite is the body that I'm closest to. Will the Scottish Rite continue to look the way it did in 1986? Will it look the way it even does now? I firmly believe that it won't. And I'm not saying that in a negative sense. Will it continue to exist? Yes. Yes, it will, but it's going to look very different, probably much more so than craft lodges. And I think the same applies to the York Rite and the Shrine. That there simply isn't the time available in society, and time has to be used judiciously. Mm-hmm. I don't think at times in the concordant bodies or even in craft lodge we really recognize that. Someone in my situation, where because I'm not married, my time is more or less my own, and even we're not conscious enough of that, of how we use people's time, and we need to. I think we need to come to grips with that.
Well said.
Well said, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a very very interesting point of view on that
It
topic.
must be used judiciously.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and obviously it's a major challenge for not just craft lodge but concordant bodies as well, and even outside of
frankly,
Masonry.
all service bodies. I was very involved in the United Church of Canada for many years, a church that incidentally is now closed. It's being used for the next 6 months as the site of a movie shoot, and it's being knocked down. That's somewhat sad to me, because that was the Cassavant organ, Opus 1285, that I first learned to play. That's where I studied organ. So there's that's sad what happened. But I've seen people get excessively involved in churches too.
At a cost.
Yeah, that's right. I can vividly remember a seminar one Saturday that the person, heaven knows I don't remember who the presenter was, but we got up and said, we see a new person come into the church, and the first thing we try and do is put that person on a committee. Well, maybe the person just wanted to be there, to have a worship experience, was not interested in governance. And I think at the end of the day, that's a mistake we make too in lodges. What do you know? Well, that person gets initiated.
Fresh meat.
That's right. Yeah. So
right.
Usually we wait until after the first meeting. Usually, but the first thing we do is
gotta make sure they come
that's
back
right.
first.
This person can be junior steward, and let's let people get used to the craft and develop in the craft before we put them in charge of governance. And I think it's a terribly flawed assumption that someone wants to be involved in governance.
Yeah,
maybe they just want to experience Masonry.
Just like the social media committee. I mean, being thrown in the social media committee right off the bat.
Yeah.
I haven't had a night off
Was
in a
that
year.
the first or the second meeting?
I think it was the third. He was
third, okay.
fresh-headed
Third,
apprentice, and he was introduced to us as far as a wonderful, talented person that gets to do all these things. And it wasn't if it wasn't for Steve, we probably wouldn't have this show going the way it is.
Yeah.
So it is something, but he also recognizes that it certainly takes time and planning, and he's got a significant other at home too, and I'm sure that they weigh out what is important and when,
discuss,
and you have to circle
ponder.
dates.
I'm terribly lucky in my. There are some people that would be scratching will be scratching their head. 8 lodges, good grief, is the guy crazy? He probably is, but anyway. Playing the organ is something I love doing. Usually, the motive for getting people involved in the line is that the people asking really don't want to be as involved in the line as they are. So, you use the term fresh meat, and that's that's probably very, very, very true.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. Right, worshipful sir. One last question for you here, because I know we got a big night planned tonight at the Barton
We do
Lodge.
indeed. This is the day after the 225th anniversary
we just
of
discovered that.
the
That's
Barton
amazing.
Lodge. Now, I'm a bit of a history buff, and if you think about, what was happening 225 years ago, it was only 53 years after the British Empire changed from Julian time to the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. Only 53 years. And that happened in September of 1752. You went to bed on September the 2nd and woke up on September the 14th. 3 to 13 disappeared. Just think about the implications of trying to do that today. And what happened with Y2K.
We struggle with daylight savings time.
That's right.
Never mind.
That's
an hour
supposedly.
difference. And
What happens when you make
function for a
13?
week.
11 days disappear. It was 53 years after George Frederick Handel wrote The Messiah. The Messiah was still relatively contemporary music. The Barton every year has Robbie Burns Night. Robbie Burns was still alive when the Barton Lodge was constituted. It's just
context.
It just blows me away.
Yeah.
And that really does say something, A, about the lodge, and B, about the institution. One cannot argue in any way, shape, and form that there isn't a place in society for the institution. How we manage that is, and quite frankly, the Barton's done a pretty good job over the last 225 years.
It's clear. I mean, it's been new news for us today, but we've learned a ton at the first 3 knocks, and you have something special going on here in Hamilton that we're very pleased to.
I say, and I'm going to say tongue in cheek, you really like the music at the Barton.
There's a plug.
Well, we look forward to hearing some of that music. So, Right Worshipful Brother Ken Adamson, we very much appreciate you taking some time to sit down with us, share some insights, your wonderful point of view. And I think it's easy to say on behalf of Masons that we appreciate the work that you do here.
Well, I very definitely appreciate, A, the time that you people have given me today to express my point of view, and B, I very much appreciate being part of this wonderful fraternity.
Excellent.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The First 3 Knocks. Happy to meet, sorry to part, happy to meet again.